Barron is stable, Warren is still critical, and Palmer is missing. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Seventh Rule with Sirach Lofton.
Hello, hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk, and today we are doing a review of Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 3, Episode 4, entitled Who Watches the Watchers? Written by Richard Manning and Hans Beimler, directed by Robert Weimer. This was October 14th, 1989. Where were you? Also, very special thanks to Chuck A for sponsoring this episode. Thank you very much, Chuck A. He's got the coolest
Chuck.
plates in town.
What's up, everybody? I'm Sirach Lofton from the Seventh Rule Podcast, and I'll be at STSF this year in the Bay Area, celebrating with our friends at Creation.
Okay. Sirach's also from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. You might recognize him from that. And my name is Ryan T. Husk of The Seventh Rule. You've got to go to this convention. It's March 8th through 10th, just south of San Francisco in Burlingame, right by the airport. You're going to love it. There are already well over 20 Star Trek and sci-fi guests, tons of panels. This is March 8th through 10th. CreationEnt.com. That's CreationEnt.com to get tickets and to get your hotel. We can't wait to see you there.
Yeah, I'll be there. Ryan will be there, and we'll represent the Seventh Rule Podcast.
And Star Trek Deep Space Nine. How are you today, Sirach?
I'm doing good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing really good. Thanks, real well. Here's the key, though. With this particular episode, and again, thanks, Chuck A. Interesting that you chose this one. We'll see if we can sift through this episode and figure out why you loved it so much. This is an episode that I remember the imagery. I remember those proto-Vulcans, like cave people Vulcans. I remember the makeup, and but I don't remember the storyline. So I wanted to ask you, but Vasquez Rocks was so cool. We got to talk about Vasquez Rocks.
No, that was Vasquez. Okay, that was one of my questions for you.
So much. But I wanted to ask you, what did you think of this episode, initially when you first started watching it, where you're like, okay, nothing's going on in this episode. It's going to be one of those thinkers. Or did it kind of dig deep on some interesting storylines?
Yeah, I think it's set up pretty well. I was interested to see, they were talking about studying these anthropologists studying the Mintaka people as proto-Vulcan humanoids. So I was interested to see how that was going to be conducted. I kind of felt like we were going to get into this story, so it was a little bit like, I was ready for it. And I knew that we were going to kind of have a Prime Directive type of episode.
They love their Prime Directive episodes, don't they?
Yeah, I just felt it. I was like, this is a Prime Directive episode. Anytime you see that village of people, you're like, how are they going to be able to interact with them without breaking the Prime Directive? And so that was pretty much, obvious to me in the beginning. And then some of the other things started to become interesting to me. I think we were going back to why Chuck liked this episode and wanted to sponsor this episode. I think it brought up some themes that I think are interesting to question when it comes to intelligence or intelligent life form meeting less intelligent life forms.
Yeah, and this is a theme. This is a theme that we've seen. And by we've seen, I mean we will be seeing more often in Star Trek The Next Generation. For example, the one that came immediately to mind, I don't remember, but everybody in the live chat and in the comments below, tell me which episode is this one with Ardra. Ardra and Feklar. I believe she turns into Feklar with all the drool all over the place. What episode was that? But anyway, what it is, the basic premise of, when what a Bronze Age society meets a futuristic society, they go, whoa, it must be gods. They must be magical. But no, it's just technology. It's just time has passed, and then there are a lot of theories out there too. A lot of people that, like the ancient aliens theories, where they say, hey, if 100,000 years ago, or even 5,000 years ago, humans were visited by aliens that are more technologically advanced than we are, we would have called them gods. There's some people that think, okay, Jesus and Moses, those are just aliens that had better technology to make seas part, or whatever it was. So who knows? Well, I don't know if we'll ever find out any kind of truth to any of those things, but that's what early life does. It's almost like the original scientists. They try to explain things that they're not equipped to explain. So they just start saying, oh, well, the reason that it rains is because I've used my rain stick. This is the thing that makes the rain happen, or the way that we keep this volcano from exploding and destroying the villages. We have to sacrifice a little virgin girl. Obviously, that's the science of it. We figured, our top minds came together and figured this out, you guys. We got it. We nailed it. But what about the time she wasn't virgin enough?
Yeah. What I think is really interesting about this, because first of all, I felt like this is an episode that Gene Roddenberry really loves.
Mm-hmm.
And what made me think that is that he's really fascinated with the fundamental core beliefs inside of religious themes, or religion in general. And those are the things that he's really trying to attack in some of his material. And what this reminds me of is the pilot episode with Q. And in that pilot episode, Q is the intelligent life form, or the more advanced life form, meeting with the Enterprise and their crew. So, and I think what is interesting, what makes it the opposite of this episode, is the pilot in this particular episode. What makes them opposites of each other is Q was spending the whole time trying to convince them that he was a god and why he was superior to them. And and why they were inferior, essentially, explaining it. And here was the Picard took the opposite approach. He was trying to say, I'm not a god.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting, even though he was still saying what Q was essentially saying, which is, you are inferior to me in your development of technology, right? So you're like on the spectrum here on the timeline, you haven't advanced farther, and you can only show them the timeline preceding them. You can't show somebody a timeline that's in advance of their own ability to grasp, right? And conceive things. So that is what was really the central theme in this episode, is like, um, that Picard was trying to make this explanation and really making a distinction between himself and how Q, another advanced life form, would handle himself in that similar situation. We saw Q with more arrogance and bravado because he was that farther on in the evolutionary ladder, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he had that kind of I'm better than you approach. And I felt like Picard in this was not doing the I'm better than you approach. He's saying, I come from you. I am you. We're not any different in that sense. We're just, more technologically advanced on that scale, on the linear kind of timeline. But that I thought made this episode interesting. And it also made me think, as I was watching it, how much Roddenberry would like tackling these particular themes in this episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Picard, he was very encouraging to the lady. And by the way, that was also, when she was up on the ship, that was also reminiscent. I don't know if reminiscent is the right word, but reminiscent of the movie First Contact, when he has what is her name? I can't remember her name right offhand. But he has a lady up and he's explaining how far, technologically advanced. He starts pointing down at the Solomon Islands and all that, which was fun. Um, and I guess it's not reminiscent if it's something that happens later on.
Before, yeah.
Yeah, so
That
it's
that
more like
that is reminiscent
foreshadowing
of
of it.
this. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, God, it's killing me that I can't remember her name though. Something that ends with a Y. Anyway, but he was very encouraging to this lady when she says, "Do you think we will go out to the stars too someday?" And he says, "Of that, I have absolutely no doubt." And that was very nice and encouraging. So for me,
Yeah.
this episode was such a mixed bag because I liked what they did and I liked, how they portrayed Picard for the most part, you know, trying to do the right thing. But then there were other times where I was just kind of like, he doesn't need to like quiz her and be like, what do you think? Like he was talking to a 3-year-old. What do you think she would feel if she saw you? Well, she would probably, I'd be like, just tell me. I don't quiz me, don't pat me on the head. Don't, just I'm asking what's going on with you. Why don't you just say, "Hey, we were just like you, 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, and we continued to build things, including this ship, and we are just like you, but further on." Oh, I get it. Well, you don't need to, you don't need to like walk her through every step. Just talk to her, man. I don't know. That part was a little weird. I get it. I understand that humans or proto-Vulcans probably grasp things better if they come to a conclusion when you walk them through it. But anyway, I was just kind of like, Picard, just tell her. You don't, this isn't
Yeah,
class.
that yeah, that's that. I had an issue with that a little bit too. Now that you say that, and I think my issue was these people um, they don't go to school, so they're not in the same. Um, they're not learning their history like that. They're not learning, what tools were developed. I don't think the Stone Age people said, "Oh, fire! I learned from that dude William that was born 20,
Yeah, they don't know years.
150 years ago. There was a guy and he discovered the fire, and then another guy named Bill Hammer. He helped us invent this hammer so we can make the like
Yeah.
are they passing that knowledge down like that, uh, or is it written in books because there were no books at this point? So how is the most of the tradition is passed down orally, like they were talking about in this episode.
Yeah.
When they kept asking the wise man, well, wasn't it like, what didn't the overseer do this or didn't the overseer do that? So when you have a tradition that's passed down, it's people are talking. The old wise man is telling you what happened. I don't know that the particular nuances of, and then we used to live in the caves until we found fire and we were able to cook, and then are those stories passed down, or this is just kind of taken for granted? Hey, but hey, we wear clothes because some dude started wearing clothes a long time ago and now we're wearing clothes. Like how do they transmit that history,
Yeah, and I feel like that's different from our history. By the way, I looked up the character's name was Lily. I kept wanting to say Shelley. It was something like Shelley or Kelly. It was Lily, played by the Alfre Woodard. Uh,
Okay.
and great stuff, great scene there. But back to this. So I don't think that when we were Bronze Age, we had a grasp of that people used to live in caves. I don't think we were at that level, and the scientists, can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we pieced that stuff together way later, like
That's what I'm saying.
100 years
Yeah.
ago in our timeline. Now, if these guys were, let's say these guys are, what are they, 2,000 years ago according to
Yeah.
our timeline, or 5,000, were they really sciencing things? Were they, I mean, maybe, but that's the other thing is we're judging them based on our experience. Maybe these people, they're much more, like they said, they're much more rational and they have more of scientific mind. So, I was able to excuse that away based on what, they kind of dropped that little hint for us. But my immediate thought at first was like, wait, whoa, these guys can't know all this stuff yet. But that's just
Yeah,
that's
and the
just
other
me.
thing I had an issue with was Nuria, who I thought did a great job of the
Yeah.
performance. It's my critique is more of the language that was used in that. I felt the language in the scene that was used between her and Picard was way too advanced for a primitive Bronze Age culture that's a hunter gatherer culture. She was like, well, the most logical scenario would be if I were to. It's like, whoa. Even formulating your sentences in that kind of a way seems really advanced. The most logical, or I would deduce this and deduce that. Like,
Mm.
um, to be able to speak like that in itself shows a level of education that I don't think these people would have had. So I think that the language itself was a little too advanced for me for this primitive culture. It would have been better if they were speaking in less uh, elaborate phraseology, in less
I
fragmented
completely agree
sentences.
with that. I was thinking the same so hard up in the ship when Picard was explaining to Nuria, the situation. And my first thought was, okay, so he has the universal translator. We get it, so they can
Right.
communicate. But she was speaking with basically a full vocabulary and I just don't I think that they would have 200 words or 500
Yes.
words. I don't think, but then
Yes.
I was again able to explain it away because
Like deduce, like
Yeah,
to
yeah,
deduce
they're
something,
not going to use the
or the
word
most
deduce.
logical or
Yeah, they're
reasonable.
living in
Part.
huts and caves and they're using words, but I was able to personally explain that away with the universal translator is translating it into
Extrapolating.
yeah, is
Yeah.
translating it into big words for us to understand. I was able to explain that in universe, but that was my first thought was like, you're talking to basically a
She
caveman.
had a Shakespeare accent, like Picard. The two of them were about to recite
They were
Shakespeare
doing a
together.
scene. Yeah, that's her scene
Yes.
partner.
And I was like, wait a minute, you can't have Shakespeare level vocabulary. You sound like the captain who's obviously been educated in all of this stuff and has years of knowledge, and you are literally, running out hunter gatherer. It just seems like it seems way too. I was a little bit off put by the language. I
Me too.
got the universal translator part. I just felt like the language was way too elaborate and extravagant for a prehistoric type of
Hmm.
civilization.
Yeah, but I loved the idea of this. I loved what they were doing and what they were teaching and what they were showing. And I had another qualm. And again, the reason I have these qualms is because they set up such a good story and such a good idea that it really makes me think. So it's kind of a weird compliment, but it set up such a good and interesting and accurate situation that then our scientific minds start to really go deeper into it. And one of the qualms I had with it, and this is just my own nitpick I guess, but they they said that it took them thousands of years to go from believing in gods and believing in fairy tales and believing in these kind of things to now living, with the rational, more of a scientific mind. It took them thousands of years, they said, to go from that to the other thing. So I felt like it wouldn't be so easy to flip them back into just immediately falling right back into religion and lore and mythology and fairy tales just like that. Now, this was a big major moment, but I figured that it is much more, much more likely that these thinkers that have left mythology behind, these rational scientific thinkers, have this guy and his daughter come back and say, we've seen this thing, it's blah, 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 that they would say, you're sick. You hit your head, it's a hallucination. They would try to figure it out. They would try to rationally figure it out. They wouldn't completely flip back into that's it, full scale religion, mythology, baptize me in the rocks. I just felt like that was the part where, and again, it's because they set up this situation that was so good. I was really with them, and then I start kind of trying to analyze it and understand it. But that was just my thinking, was that I don't think they would have reverted. I think it's more likely they would have tried to explain why those two people were saying the things that they were saying. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. And that actually didn't sit 100% well with me when Picard had that speech about, they've abandoned their belief in the supernatural, how it took them thousands of years to abandon their belief in the supernatural. And you want me to send them back to the dark ages of superstition. This is what he says: the dark ages of superstition and ignorance and fear.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And my thing is that superstitions, ignorance, and fear is what led us out of the dark ages eventually. It still exists to this day. So all of the technology and every advancement was actually made during the existence of those things. And so superstitions and ignorance and fear led to the day where we're at right now, the point where we're at right now. I mean, there's all types of religious beliefs in the world. There's all type of ignorance in the world. There's all types of fear of the unknown in the world. And so
watch a baseball game if you want to see superstition.
Yeah.
Every single, they wear special socks.
And it's all around the world. And yet it hasn't hindered humanity's development and ingenuity and the advancements in technology. If anything, it may be a undercurrent or one of the driving forces behind it. People's fear of some terrible disaster, so they become ingenuity. They have some kind of ingenuity behind it. They may invent something that will deter some climate catastrophe or something to that nature because of their fear of it, right? Because
fear is the greatest motivator. It always has been. Yeah.
Right. And even ignorance, for example, when you look at the invention of the light bulb, ignorance of what it would take to be the filament that would become the incandescent light bulb, it was the ignorance that kept Edison driving forward. It was like, okay, it's not that, it's not this. I don't know what it is, but it's something. I got to find it. And so there's a level of ignorance there that keeps you driving forward, right? There's this, I have to figure it out. They also talk about the philosopher's stone. There's an ignorance behind the alchemy of turning base metals into gold, but that ignorance is what has driven scientists, philosophers to try to solve that puzzle of, what can I do to add an electron to a base metal to turn it to a gold? And so these are thoughts and processes that have driven the evolution of mankind more so than stifled it. And so that's why I kind of disagreed with that idea that superstition, ignorance, or fear is the definition of what it is to be in the dark ages.
That's really interesting, because I love the quote and I knew exactly what they were trying to say. And now you saying that, I'm like, I completely agree with that as well. Words are clumsy, and what the words that somebody's using to try to convey something is not going to necessarily be exactly what somebody receives when they hear that. And I think there was a lot of that in this episode. Some really good, interesting, smart, fun storytelling that gets our brains moving. Like my brain was moving. There was a lot of things.
Yeah.
But you know what? Let's
Yeah.
talk about this a bit more on the other side of our break. Super quick. We'll be right back on the seventh rule.